الحمد لله الذي وكفى والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده أما بعد. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الطهور شطر الإيمان. Respected listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for attending the second lecture on Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala's Al-Arba'in fi Usul al-Din. So just to recap, last week was the first lecture. I think there's 4 lectures or 5 lectures. Five lectures, sorry. So I've got another 3 after today. And last week we just covered a few preliminary words regarding the book and Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh. We mentioned that Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh passed away in 1111. He was alive during the Seljuk period, for example, and there was a massive impact that he had on the Sunni world at that time, and the revival of the Deen through his life, through his works, specifically one book that he wrote, which was his magnum opus, called Ihya al-Deen, the revival of the Islamic sciences. And if you missed last week's lecture, the Mahfuz I think has a recording somewhere. So Mahfuz will be able to, or the ISOC will be able to share the recording. But in that particular lecture, we also mentioned his whole life and how he went through his spiritual crisis. Academically, although he was into the teaching of Islam, he went through a spiritual crisis in the sense that he felt he wasn't doing it for the right reasons. There was a bit of an awakening that took place. And he went on a journey to realize and recognize and come to know Allah Almighty. And when he returned, so before he went, he was on the highest post within the Nizamiya Madrasa of Baghdad, which is a massive institute at the time. Baghdad was on the largest city's center of civilization, if you think about it, nearly 1,000 years ago. And he went through a spiritual crisis. He's earning a very good salary. He has influence. He's written books. Academically, in terms of the Islamic sciences, he's at the pinnacle. But then all of a sudden, he goes through a crisis where he feels what he's delivering isn't being done for the right reasons. He goes through a spiritual crisis and his tongue becomes sealed. He says it's like a knot that's been tied to my tongue and I'm able to lecture. And then he makes the excuse of going for Hajj. And when he goes for Hajj, instead of going for Hajj first, he goes to Damascus and he stays there. And he goes through a spiritual awakening. He spends time with Mashayikh. He spends time in what they call the path of Suluk, or the path of Tasawwuf, or the path of Sufism. And it's not all about jumping and dancing and having a rave. There's a lot more to it than that. Or there's a whole aspect beyond that. And the essence of Tasawwuf and Suluk, he brings it back down to the Quran and Hadith. And he says, and he cites, and he writes the book, and in the book, I'm going to come back to that, in the book he mentions that there's 10 things that spiritually destroy a person. So just to give you a taste of this, we've decided to lecture on 4 of them, not 5, 4 of them. 5, the first one is the introduction. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he brings all the spirituality back from Quran and Hadith, and he mentions right at the beginning of the 10, he says قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, that success indeed lies with a person who purifies the heart. And if you remember last week I mentioned وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, that Allah Almighty takes oath on 7 things, according to some ulama it's 9 things. When a person takes an oath on something, what comes after the oath is what he's emphasizing. So the thing that Allah Almighty is emphasizing is, after taking oath on 7 things, the sun and the moon, the sky and the heavens and the earth, etc., etc., then he says, indeed the person who's purified himself has achieved success. Now what does purification mean? Purification means the removal of all the negative traits that a person develops or inherently has because of the way insan is. We become jealous over time, we become angry, we have shahawat, lust comes inside us, we don't look after our mind, we don't look after our eyesight. Lots of different illnesses start creeping in. Love of wealth, love of dunya, love of status. Yeah? And then once you want status, then you start elbowing each other and you want to push the other guy down, and then you impact his character, or you have a go at his character or her character, and then you start bullying them, or you might pressurize them, you speak ill of them, backbiting. So many illnesses start coming in, one after the other, one after the other. And I mentioned that when one illness comes in, a few others pop in at the same time. You know, for example, sometimes you read, if you're a Daily Mail reader, of these like atrocious, notorious murders, you know, suburbia. You know, you never think that Mr. and Mrs. Campbell somewhere, you've got no idea who they are. You know, they've got a nice house, nice job, perfect life, you think. All of a sudden, they got pulled into or dragged into committing the most heinous of crimes. What was it all to do with? And then you go back and you read the whole story. Daily Mail has a lot of gruesome, gory details, goes into the life and the backgrounds and all sorts of things. I'm citing the Daily Mail, not because I'm a Daily Mail reader, but my background is journalism. I worked as a journalist for a long time. So that's why I'm citing the Daily Mail, because I know the Daily Mail quite well. And the fact is that then they start, when you start looking into the story, you come down to the bottom that, you know what, they killed the next door neighbor because they were just simply jealous of them. Or, you know, there's a small spiritual illness that just snowballs into an avalanche. And that's what happens to a person. And there's so many people within our own lives, we look and we think and we see that, you know, they start off with one thing small, then another thing, then another thing, then another thing, and before you know it, years and years and years have passed. And then they're a completely different person. There's no reality check. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah, he takes over, he says that success lies with the person who purifies the soul. So, and then the 10 illnesses, just at the beginning, he has got one. So Ihya Ulumuddin, he then summarized into a short book called Usul al-Arba'in fi Usul al-Din, the 40 principles of religion. There you have it. And there's one section in there where he talks about the spiritual illnesses, and we're going to go over the first one. But before that, as a precursor, he says, Qad afla man zakka, which I've explained in detail. Then he mentions another hadith, a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, At-tuhuru shatrul iman, that purification is half of iman. And a lot of us know this hadith. They say, yeah, if you want to pray salah, you got to do wudu. Yeah? If you want to do tawaf around the Kaaba, you got to be in wudu. Remember that, don't forget. Yeah? I went for Umrah over the Christmas period. My son, you know, is so busy right now. And we did like 6 tawafs or 6 shots. And on the 7th one, something came up and I said, you got wudu, haven't you? And he said, no. I said, oh, right. Well, you can go back around and do the other 6 because wudu is wajib, it's a compulsory act in the tawaf itself, not for sa'i. So we know this hadith in the sense that at-tuhuru shatrul iman, that purification is half of iman. In the sense that you need to do wudu, you need to do ghusl, etc. But there's another inner meaning behind it, which is that the purification of the heart is also half of iman. A person believes in Allah Almighty, but is his heart pure? Is the purification of the heart taking place? And he says, فَافْحَمْ مِنْهُ أَنَّ كَمَالَ الْإِيمَانِ بِتَزْكِيَةِ الْقَلْبِ عَمَّا لَا يُحِبُّ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. He says that understand from this that the perfection of iman is with the purification of the heart from that which Allah Almighty does not like. Yeah? So that's the meaning he takes. And then he says, وَتَحْلِيَتِهِ, and then to adorn it, بِمَا يُحِبُّ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى, with those qualities, those traits, those characteristics in one's temperament that one should try and inculcate into one's life, which Allah Almighty likes. For example, having a good thought about a person, or at the same time, being generous, being kind, honest, etc., etc. These are the praiseworthy traits. But our focus is on the negative traits. We need to remove them. In fact, our ulama say, and the mashaykh say, based on the Quran hadith, that the purification of the self from all negative traits, and we only mentioned 10 here, there's a lot more, but he brings it back to 10, is wajib, is compulsory, in the way that salah is compulsory, hajj is compulsory, Sawm and fasting in Ramadan is compulsory, zakat is compulsory, making effort on one's own nafs itself, one's own heart, to purify it and bring it back into equilibrium and to bring it back to how Allah Almighty wants it to be, is wajib, compulsory on every single individual, male or female, as long as they've got senses. وَكَيْفَ يَشْتَغِلُ بِالطَّهَارَ عَلَى man la ya'rifu najasa. The Imam Ghazali rahmatullah, he says, he's mentioned that purification is half of Iman. And then he says, and how can a person who doesn't know what impurity is, how can he preoccupy himself with purification if he doesn't know what impurity is? If you didn't know that blood is impure, and if it's on your clothes, it's going to affect your salah, how are you going to purify? You just pray your salah with it. If you didn't know that wine and alcohol and all the other type of beverages that they now produce, is impure, it falls on your clothes, it makes your salah invalid. You got to make sure you purify. In the same way, how can you purify yourself from the spiritual ailments and impurities if you don't know what they are? وَلْنَذْكِرِ الْأَخْلَاقَ الْمَذْمُومَ وَهِيَ كَثِيرَةٌ. He says that now we shall mention the reprehensible negative traits, and there are many, however they return back to 10. And the first one, and I can see some new faces at the front. So last week we did spoil it a little bit. We said that what is the first one? So brother, would you like to have a shot and guess? What do you think the first negative trait is? And it's not a trick question. Anything that you want.
I would say judging people.
Judging people.
Yeah.
I think that's right. That is a negative trait, being judgmental and having a negative view of people. That's definitely a trait. But you know what Imam Ghazali brings it back down to? I think you guys, you seem like someone that goes to the gym regular. It's probably aimed at people like me. Yeah. He focuses on the food. He says, Al-asl awwal fi shari ta'am, that the first is gluttony, eating too much. Eating too much.
Nafs.
Overeating.
Nafs,
it comes in. Let's not spoil it. Let's not jump a few steps ahead. Let's wait a little while. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he says, Al-asl awwal, the first impurity, the first negative trait in a person, the first principle is habitual excessive eating. Yeah? Overeating, overconsumption, binge eating. And it's very easily done because, like if you work from home, you wake up Fajr, you'll have a cup of tea, maybe a biscuit or a rusk, or I don't know, something like that. Then you have your porridge, then you'll have your 11sies, yeah? Then you have lunch, then you have an afternoon snack, which might be, an orange and an apple, yeah? Or maybe a marathon or a Snicker bar, yeah? Or a pack of crisps. And then you'll have something at 4 o'clock, tea, yeah? We have tea, yeah, chai, karak chai, maybe, I don't know. And then you'll have another little snack, and when the kids come home from madrasa at 7, 8 o'clock, you'll have another bit. And then, how can you go to bed without Ovaltine or hot chocolate, with the rain hitting the windows, the book in your hand, before you fall asleep. You need that little snack there, a cup of milk, yeah? So how many meals have you had in a day? Or how much have you had in a day? Allahu A'lam, yeah? And you look at social media, everyone's tweeting. Well, tweeting's a bit old now, isn't it? I suppose Instagramming. I've made a new verb. Everyone's taking pictures on Instagram, on what's the other one? Snapchat, and then there's the other one. TikTok. Yeah. So everyone's on these Snapchat, all these different apps. I don't know what they are, and they're taking pictures of what they've had: oodles, noodles, and Jaffa, and all the rest of the places, and all these fantastic weird places, and then everyone's drooling over them, hungry over them, and they keep feeding themselves continuously, yeah? And everyone wants to try something new, continuously, and that's how it all comes out. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he says that gluttony is the greatest source of harm. وَهُوَ مِنَ الْأُمَّهَاتِ الْعَظِيمَ الضَّارِّ فِي الدِّينِ, which affects a person's religion. The greatest harm. لِأَنَّ الْمَعْدَةَ يَنْبُوءُ الشَّهْوَاتِ. Why? Because he says that the stomach itself is the wellspring of shahawat, of desires. All sorts of desires. And from it, lots of things start coming out. So for example, he lists and he says that the first principle is eating too much. And so many different things come out from it, such as love of wealth, yeah, because he'll explain why in a little while. Desire for fame, for example, comes from it. And then from that, you get pride, ostentation, jealousy, hatred. All of these things stem from the stomach, yeah. He explains how it comes in a little while. And then he supports this with a few hadith. Yeah? So for example, he says, إِذْ مِنْهَا تَتَشَعَّبُ شَهْوَةُ الْفَرْجِ, that the shahwat and the desires of the reproductive systems come from the stomach. And then from there, إِذْ غَلَبَتْ شَهْوَةُ الْمَعْقُولِ وَالْمَنْقُولِ, a person then delivers the desire to eat lots of food. So he wants more, right? He also wants to spend time with the opposite gender. In sha'aba minha shahwa, another shahwat, another desire comes from there. وَحِبُّ الْمَالِ, in order to feed those two things. If you want to eat the best food, yeah, and you want to spend time with the best, you have a good time with the opposite gender, then you need another thing to spend to in order to feed that habit, and that's wealth. You know, you need wealth to eat. If you want to eat that burger that costs £100 with I don't know what is going inside it. Somebody showed me on one of the social media channels. I said, you need money, £100 you can feed a family for a week, yeah, or 2 weeks. But you know, like, you want to spend that much money on eating out, fine dining, on all the rest of it, you need money. So then, how does he feed those habits? He feeds those habits through wealth. Why? Because if he wants to fulfill those desires, he needs wealth. Wealth has to come in. Yeah? When you want wealth, you need something else with that. You need status. In order to get wealth, status is also very important. You need to have a high ranking. You need to show yourself to be greater than other people. So hubbul jah, which is another reprehensible trait that comes in. Why? Because trying to earn wealth through without a status becomes difficult. ثم عند وصول الماء والجاه وطلبهما تصدم عافاتكم. Then all the different afflictions then come in. كالكبر والرياء. A person wants wealth, he wants status. Then what he gets, he starts developing pride. He starts developing ostentation. Hasad, jealousy comes in. Hiqd, and disliking another person. Adawa, enmity. ومنبع جميع ذلك, and all of these things have stemmed from the stomach. ولهذا عظم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أمر الجوع. And that's why Nabi Kareem صلى الله عليه وسلم, he mentions, that's why Nabi Kareem صلى الله عليه وسلم, he mentions that ما من عمل أحب إلى الله تعالى من الجوع والعطش. There's no action that's more beloved to Allah Almighty than hunger and thirst. And this is one of the 4 principles of mujahada. You know, the mashayikh, they often write that in the spiritual struggle, there's 4 things that a person should do. One is qillat kalam, speaking less. And if you do speak right things and speak with thought and paying attention to that. The second thing is qillat ta'am, eating less food. The third is sleeping less or in moderation. Yeah? وَقِلَّةِ الْإِخْتِلَاطِ مَعَ الْأَنَامِ, and then spending less time with people, but in a measured way. It's all gone out of the door nowadays with social media. If a person controls these 4, then he's able to discipline his lower self, the nafs. However, this needs to be done in context and with moderation. There should be no extremism in all of this. Anyway, the Imam, he then cites Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says that لا يدخل ملكوت السماء من ملأ بطنه. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the person who fills his stomach shall not enter the realm of the heavens. وقال سيد الأعمال الجوع. He said the best of actions is a bit of hunger. وقال عليه أفضل الصلاة والسلام, Prophet said, الفكر نصف العبادة, that meditation is half of worship. وقلة الطعام هي العبادة, and eating less is ibadah. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام وأفضلكم عند الله تعالى أطولكم جوعا وتفكرا. He said that the best of you in the eyes of Allah Almighty is the one who remains hungry the most and the one who meditates the most. وأبغضكم إلى الله تعالى كل أكول وشروب ونؤوم. That the worst in front of Allah Almighty is every person who eats too much, drinks too much, and he sleeps too much. In another hadith he says, مَا مَلَ ابْنُ آدَمَ وِعَاءً شَرٌّ مِّن بَطْنِهِ, that the son of Adam does not fill any vessel that's worse than his stomach. حسب ابن آدم لقيمات يقمن صلبه وإن كان لا محالة فثلث لطعامه وثلث شرابه وثلث لنفسه. He says it's enough for the son of Adam a few morsels just to make sure his back remains straight. And if that's impossible, then he should split his stomach into 3. And this is what the ulama often mention. You split your stomach into 3. Number 1, a third for food, a third for water, and a third for breathing, nafas. And when you say like stomach, a third, but you don't expand your stomach as well at the same time. Otherwise you'll be eating double. Yeah. You got to keep your stomach as the normal size, but eat in moderation. A third for food, a third for water, and a third for nafas is breathing. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam also said, Inna shaitan liyajri ibn ibn Adam majra dam. That indeed the devil, he runs within the vessels and what do you call it, the veins and the arteries of the son of Adam. فَضَيِّقُ مَجَارِيَهُ. So make these places, make these veins and arteries narrow, بِالْجُوعِ وَالْأَجْشِ, by remaining hungry and remaining thirsty. And don't overeat yourself, eat in moderation. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said to Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, Adimi qur'a bab al-jannah. He said to Sayyidina Aisha, his wife, that continuously knock on the door of Jannah. Yuftah laki, it shall be open for you. Qala, she said, Nudim, how do we continuously do this? Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Bil-ju'i wal-dhamai, by remaining hungry and remaining thirsty. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam also said, Kulu washrabu fi ansaf al-butun, fa innahu juz'un min al-nubuwa. Eat and drink half of your bellies. Yeah? Fa innahu juz'un min al-nubuwa. It's a part of prophethood. Anyway, so Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he's mentioned the harms of food, how all the spiritual ailments stem from food. Then he mentions all the hadith, and he explains when the hadith they support this view that eating less is recommended. Then after that, he has another section, Fi bayani fawaid al-ju'. He mentions the benefits of hunger, and he presents the secrets of hunger and why it's connected to the way of the hereafter. And he actually mentions 7 things which I've summarized here, and I'm going to read up very quickly. Number 1, when a person remains hungry and he eats less, then 7 things or 7 benefits he acquires. Number 1, clarity of the heart and keen insight. Clarity of the heart, keen insight. Number 2, softness of the heart, so much that one feels the pleasure of conversing with Allah Almighty and being affected by dhikr and worship. Our condition in Ramadan, when we fast, we feel a bit more spiritual, closer to Allah Almighty. That's what the benefit of hunger actually does. Number 3, it humbles the ego. It removes arrogance and a dominating attitude. Yeah. Number 4, tribulation is from the gates of paradise, in that tribulation is torment. And by experiencing it, one dreads punishment in the hereafter, in the afterlife. Number 5, the greatest benefit is breaking the other desires, which are the wellspring of disobedience and overpowering nafs ammara, i.e. the dictatorial ego. So hunger actually breaks the other desires, yeah, and it brings you closer to Allah Almighty. Number 6, it lightens the body for tahajjud. Person eats too much, he struggles to get up in the morning. He might stay asleep all day, yeah. But if you eat less in moderation, it's easier for you to sleep in moderation and wake up on time. And number 7, he says, which is something that's beneficial to all of us in these days of costs, what's the word? Austerity, yeah? Cost of living, lightness of burden, financial burden. Yani a person is able to suffice on a little and prefer poverty. So Imam Ghazali, he mentions all of those benefits in the second section, and then he goes, how do you reduce food? So this is a very interesting way Imam Ghazali structures his chapters. He explains, he has a introduction where he explains the benefit. He then supports it with Quran and Hadith, and then thereafter he provides the benefits, and then thereafter he explains to you how you can go about eating less and reducing food. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he says, لَعَلَّكَ تَقُولُ قَدْ صَارَ الشِّبَعُ وَالْإِكْثَارُ فِي الْأَكِلِ لِي عَادَةً فَكَيْفَ أَتْرُكَهَا. He says, maybe it's the case, perhaps it's the case that you may say that eating to the full and eating a lot is my habit. Yeah? فَكَيْفَ أَتْرُكَ, how do I abandon it? So he answers this and he says, أَنَّ ذَلِكَ يَسْحَلُ عَلَى مَنْ أَرَادَهُ بِالتَّدْرِيجِ. That eating less is very easy for the person who tries to do it in small steps, bit by bit, baby steps. Yeah? He takes tadrij, slowly, and it's cumulative. You build up to it. وَهُوَ أَن يُنْقَصَ كُلَّ يَوْمٍ مِّن طَعَامِ لُقْمَةً. And the way to do it is by decreasing one morsel every day. So if a person eats 2 chapatis, for example, or 2 khubs, or 2 aish, whatever you want to call it, depending on, or two slices of bread. Yeah. So instead of eating a full 2, eat 1 3/4 for a little while, and then after that make it 1 1/2, and then after that make it 1. You need focus on your portions. decrease your portions. That's what Imam Ghazali says. Until you've reached eating one less roti, he says, or khubz over a month, and eating less becomes your habit. And you really think about it, who needs Weight Watchers? I don't know, do they still have Weight Watchers? No, you guys don't know what Weight Watchers are. So Weight Watchers used to be this thing for like middle-aged people to lose weight. They used to have advertisements everywhere. So who needs Weight Watchers? Just decrease your portions bit by bit. Then he says, if you want to eat less, then you need to focus on three things, three principles. He says you need to focus on time, amount, and type. Yeah? So in terms of amount, and I'm going to go over what he says, but I want you all to take this with a pinch of salt. Because some of the commentators on Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh, they say that some of this stuff that he explains is probably suitable for his time and age, but in our age, it's not suitable. But just to give you a flavor of what Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh says, I'm just going to quickly go over it. But hold your horses, don't act upon it. Yeah? Otherwise I'll have some lawsuits against me. Yeah? But he says three things. Number one, he says you need to focus on time, amount, and type. He says, in terms of amount, there's a lofty, there's a high level, there's a mid level, and there's a low level. And he says the lofty level is the way of the Siddiqeen, very close to Allah Almighty. And they just eat enough just to live. Yeah, sadda ramak, to remove the hunger. The middle way is, he says the middle way is roughly around 272 grams. Yeah, and this is the way of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu and a group of the companions, that they used to eat around 270 grams. So the measurement that they actually used to have in the time of Prophet is called a mud. And the mud, if you use it for weight, if you use it for liquids or weight, if you use it for weights, half a mud is 270 grams in a day. I don't think we can survive on that. Yeah, how much is like a pack of crisps? If you buy a multi-pack, is like, what, 50 grams? Yeah, something like that. Slice of bread, how much is that? You check your porridge in. I mean, my porridge in the morning, I think it'll be probably about 250 grams. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, and the lowest level is one mud, which is 544 grams. Yeah, but like I said before, don't act upon it. So he says this is the amount that people should focus on. And he was writing for an audience 1,000 years ago. In terms of time, how long should you remain hungry? So he says there's a high level, a mid level, and a low level. For the high level, he says you should go for 3 days without food. Yeah, 3 days without food. Middle level, 2 days without food. And the lower level, just eating once a day. How many times did we count before in terms of snacks and meals in a day? 7, 5, 6? Yeah, something like that. So he says the lower level is just to eat once a day. And then he says, in terms of type, the type of food you're eating. So he says, wheat bread with a condiment, a curry or a dip, maybe a hummus, baba ghanoush, anything like that. A nice baba ghanoush or a mutabbal, something like that, right? So wheat bread with a condiment. That's the loftiest level. And the lower level, he says, is just eating the bread by itself, without a condiment. However, for the purpose, that's what Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says. Anyway, for the purpose of this lecture, what I'm going to say is that Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, what he suggests is probably right for his audience, but it's a little bit extreme for our sake, especially in this day and age. So I referred back to another book by one of the mashayikh called Imdad al-Suluk, also known as Irshad al-Muluk, written by one of the great Sufi mashayikh approximately over 100 years ago. And he discusses this point in there. And he says that yes, in the earlier Sufis, like Imam Ghazali, they do mention this. But in our day and age, talking about 120 years ago, yeah? In our day and age, not everyone is able to suffice on this. And he says that the earlier Sufis would take the difficult path, but looking at the temperament of people today, the later Sufis have made it easier for us. And they say that one should be moderate and that this is the best way. You should eat in a moderate fashion. Moderate is to eat such an amount that one does not burp. One does not burp, so he doesn't eat so much that he's like stuffed and he's like, oh, I can't even get up. Yeah? And then when he moves, he all of a sudden burps. Yeah? And the stomach isn't so full, so it's not so empty that one's not able to function as a human being. Sometimes you're very hungry, you can't function, you can't do ibadah, you can't read Quran. You can't even function during the day, you do need something inside your stomach. So you should eat enough that's going to keep you going. Yeah? But you don't eat too much that you can't do anything, or you start burping. Yeah? And then he says, one should be not so hungry that one is unable to worship. I think this is also not positive. One should eat enough just so that it can easily be digested, and then he's ready to carry on. And you should, again, one of the things is, in our day and age, we eat out of habit. It's time, it's 4 o'clock tea, I need tea. Yeah? Do you really need to drink tea? Do you really need those samosas and those pakoras? Yeah? Do you need that chutney? And all the ladies and men, at my house anyway, we're all making samosas and all the little things for the freezers for Ramadan, and you're getting a bit of extra, with your supper and your lunch. You might get 3 extra fry-ups. Do I really need that? I don't think I really need it. I'm just eating for the enjoyment. Yeah? Do I really need to do that? Do I need to go to the coffee shop and have an extra bagel with that or something like that? I mean, do you really need that? I mean, it's a question. One of the Mashaykh, he captures this beautifully in one of the writings. He says, and this is I'm going to quote him verbatim. He says, reduction in food is not an end in itself, but it's a means of acquiring a specific aim. The aim is to weaken the animal urge in man. The aim is to weaken the animal, the shahwat inside man, and thereby prevent the lower self from sinning. Therefore, if the self can be controlled and restrained from sin without reducing food, then reduction itself isn't necessary. Furthermore, he says, however, cheerfulness and joy in worship. If you're too hungry, you become a bit ratty, irritated, on the edge. Just give him a banana or put a bottle in his mouth, he'll be right after that. Big baby. So they say, cheerfulness and joy in worship are experienced if the body is in a state of health and strength. And experience shows that nowadays health, in most cases, suffers as a result of reduction in food. So going to the extreme. At the same time, one must abstain from excessive eating and adhere to a moderation. The capacity of people differs, hence moderation will differ for different people. For a person it might be 1 chapati, for another guy it's 2. There's another guy who pushes weights, he runs, he does cardio, he works out left, right and center. That guy, he needs to eat full. I don't know, have you ever read about this? There was a guy called, a wrestler in India, they used to call him Gama Pelwan from the Punjab. He was from Amritsar. Oh, he was only 5'6". They gave him the title Rustam-e-Hind, which meant he was like the biggest wrestler. Put Habib aside, put Tyson aside,
Islam.
put Fury aside,
Islam Akachu.
Say that again. Islam.
He's a UFC fighter.
Oh, sorry. See, I'm out of touch here. I'm really sorry. I'm out of touch. I just follow what my son tells me every now and again. I heard there was a boxing match last night. Apparently. Fury, his brother, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jake Paul.
Yeah. So basically, Gama Pelwan. If you ever Google Gama Pelwan, Google run a day on, they dedicate Google to a particular individual. Gama Pelwan. Eat like Gama Pelwan. The Punjabis say. Eat like Gama. And he came all the way in the 1920s or 30s to London, and he wrestled a Polish chap who was the world wrestling champion at the time, and he basically within a minute or 30 seconds he pinned him down. He kept him down for 7 minutes, and he won the fight. And this was Gama Pelwan. He died an old man in the 1960s. But if you look at what he used to eat in a day, it's amazing. He used to eat like this many desi chicken, desi ghee. He used to have almond milk, and the guy was healthy. You see his muscles. You can see him on YouTube. There's no live pictures of the guy wrestling like Habib and them guys. But you look at his diet, and then you look at his body, and then you look at his diet. You think, wow, how did this guy survive? Bruce Lee took inspiration from his workout regime, and his diet as well at the same time. He used to drink like 1.5 liters of almond milk in a day, and I don't know, it's just next level stuff. But anyway, what I'm saying is, what the Sheikh says, the capacity of people differs. Hence, moderation will differ for different people. If Gama Pelwan was to come here and then he was to moderate himself, if what my moderation is compared to his, is going to be completely different. It depends on the person, individual, but moderation is important. A person should eat moderately. Then he says the guideline in this matter is to eat when hungry. That's the rule of thumb. The guideline in this matter is to eat when hungry and to stop eating when you feel that you can still eat a few more morsels. So you've ate, I can still dig down that biryani half a page or that kapsa, yeah? I could really smash it big time. But you know what? I'm going to stop now. That's enough for me. And I can survive. I'm happy, I'm pleasant, I can get up, I can function as a human being. I'm not ratty, I've had enough. A few more morsels, he leaves it. In other words, one is allowed to eat to one's fill, but not to satisfy one's craving. So, in summary, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he says that the purification of the self from the reprehensible traits is wajib upon every single individual. And a person should strive towards that. Success in the real world, and success in the real sense, in this world and the hereafter, is success in terms of purifying the self from all negative traits. Wajib upon people.
How do you attain that?
How do you attain that?
Like we say, At-Tahur Shatrul Iman, this Prophet Hadith, we all know it's the cleanness, the purification, yeah?
Yeah.
But how do you attain that?
I think that's a brilliant question. I'm going to answer that with 5 points, if I remember what the 5 points are. In 1 second. Let me summarize, and I want to come to that point right at the end, because I think you've asked a really good question, and I want to answer that question. So the first thing is, number 1, that's why Imam Ghazali is that. Then the first negative trait that he says is sharit ta'am, which is gluttony, eating too much. In summary of everything he said is the last bit. Yani, the guideline in this matter is to eat when hungry, stop eating when you feel that you can still eat a few more morsels. In other words, one is allowed to eat to one's fill, but not to satisfy one's craving. Now, the question is, how do you purify yourself? You know? Many of us are probably being